When I was 13, my family lived in a small town in Virginia. My dad was active duty Army at the time and had recently been deployed overseas. His deployment was scheduled to last 10 months, which meant it was just my mom, my younger brother, and me at home. We had already been living there for about 2 years, and despite being far from extended family, I actually liked it a lot. The neighborhood was quiet and surrounded by woods, which suited me perfectly. I was very much a tomboy. I spent most of my free time outside, skateboarding, climbing trees, or wandering through the wooded areas behind our house. I had no interest in makeup or boys the way a lot of girls my age were starting to. I was especially close to my dad, so him leaving hit me harder than I expected. My relationship with my mom, on the other hand, was strained. She was one of those cheerleader mom types who desperately wanted me to be more feminine, and the older I got, the more I resisted. We weren't close, and we argued often. About a month after my dad left, a new neighbor moved into the house next to ours. Our property sat on about half an acre, with a small lake at the far end. The lake technically belonged to another neighbor, but they didn't mind us using it. Our house was a 2-story place with a large backyard full of trees and my mom's carefully maintained garden. My brother Aaron was 10 at the time, and we were very close. One afternoon, while we were playing outside, my mom suddenly called us in and told us to wash up. She had cooked a pasta dish and said we were going to bring it over to welcome the new neighbor. I remember being annoyed. Aaron and I didn't want to stop playing, but we followed her anyway. When we walked over, I saw a moving truck parked out front. The house itself looked normal. 2 stories, gray siding, small porch. My mom rang the doorbell, and the door opened almost immediately. The woman standing there looked like she was in her mid-50s. She had extremely long dark hair streaked with gray, hanging straight down around her face. Her skin was deeply wrinkled, and her eyes were a muddy brown. Something about her made me uncomfortable the instant I saw her. My mom clearly felt it too, though she tried to hide it. My mom introduced herself and handed over the pasta. The woman took it without saying a word. Her eyes never left me. Even when my mom introduced Aaron and me by name, she kept staring at me, completely unblinking. "Riley?" she finally said, her voice low and rough. "What a lovely name." She tried to smile, but it came out wrong, like she wasn't used to doing it. My mom didn't stay long. She made a quick excuse about dinner and practically rushed us back home. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman next door. I had no idea at the time that she would end up changing my life completely. For a few weeks, nothing happened. She kept to herself and never spoke to us. I almost forgot about her. Then one morning, while walking to the bus stop, I felt like someone was watching me. I looked toward her house and saw her standing at an upstairs window, smiling at me. In her hand was one of the flowers from my mom's garden. She didn't wave. She didn't move. She just stood there, smiling, until I forced myself to look away. I nearly missed the bus. After that, things slowly began to change. Whenever Aaron and I played outside, we felt watched. Eventually, I started noticing her standing at the chain-link fence between our yards, staring at us. She never spoke. She just watched. It happened every single time we went outside. Eventually, we stopped playing out there altogether. When I told my mom, she brushed it off and said the woman was probably just making sure we didn't get hurt. That response made me angry, but I didn't argue. Then the phone calls started. Almost every day around 3:30, when I got home from school, the house phone would ring. When I answered, there was nothing, just silence, then a click. After several days, I stopped answering. My mom answered instead. "Is Riley there?" the woman asked. When my mom said yes and asked why, the call disconnected. From then on, I was convinced the calls were to make sure I was home. One Saturday, my mom took Aaron on a school field trip and let me stay home alone. I was nervous, but she locked the doors and reassured me. About an hour later, someone knocked on the front door. I didn't answer. The knocking turned into loud banging. Then I heard her voice. "Riley, I know you're in there. Let me inside." I hid in the bathroom, phone in hand, too scared to call anyone. After several minutes, the noise stopped. I didn't come out until my mom got home. That was the moment she finally started to worry. Things escalated after that. The neighbor somehow knew what I was doing inside the house. One night, my mom burst into my room crying, accusing me of smoking. Someone had called her and described exactly what I was doing. The only way to see into my room was from our backyard. The phone calls became more aggressive. Once, she told my mom that I wasn't her daughter and demanded I be brought home. Whatever she said next made my mom cry harder than I'd ever seen. The worst moment came after an argument with my mom. I stepped outside to cool off, and immediately the neighbor's door opened. She came out looking unkempt, holding a container of moldy pasta. She asked if I was hungry and wanted to come eat with her. When I didn't respond, she dumped the food onto her porch without breaking eye contact. Months later, my dad finally came home. Shortly after, we were relocated to Texas. On the day we left, she stood in her doorway, smiling and blowing me a kiss. My dad flipped her off, and we drove away. Even now, years later, she still finds ways to contact us. The calls have slowed, but they haven't stopped. She tells me she loves me, and that she's waiting for me to come home. I don't know how she keeps finding us. I just want it to end. I'm a woman in my early 20s, and about 2 years ago I moved out on my own for the first time. I live in a large apartment complex, the kind where people mostly keep to themselves. I don't really know my neighbors, and for the most part, they don't know me either. Early on, that independence felt freeing, but over time it started to make me uneasy. If something went wrong, I wasn't sure anyone would notice, or care enough to check. Nothing bad happened at first. It was just a quiet place where people came and went. Then, sometime last year, I started noticing a man who regularly walked his dog in the grassy common area behind my unit. That space gets used a lot, so at first he didn't stand out. His dog was small and friendly, the kind that always wants attention. I have a cat, and my back door is mostly glass, so whenever the dog passed by, the two of them would play through the door, pawing at the glass and running back and forth. It was harmless, and honestly pretty cute. One afternoon I was outside smoking when the dog ran straight up onto my porch, tail wagging, clearly thrilled to see me. The man followed a moment later and apologized, laughing as he called the dog back. That was the first time we actually spoke. I'll call him Mark. At first, Mark seemed fine, normal enough, friendly, chatty. Since I smoke and he took his dog out often, we started running into each other a lot, especially during the summer. Those quick hellos turned into longer conversations. Sometimes we'd talk for an hour or more after work, just standing outside. After a couple of weeks of this, I gave him my phone number. I didn't have many friends nearby, and it felt nice to have someone familiar around. Pretty quickly, though, it became obvious that he wanted more than friendship. He brought it up constantly, sometimes jokingly, sometimes not. He made it clear he was interested in dating or something physical. I told him plainly, more than once, that I wasn't interested in anything like that. Not with him, not with anyone. I expected that to be the end of it, but it never was. Every time we talked, he circled back to it. After a while, it stopped feeling awkward and started feeling irritating. Around the same time, he became fixated on getting me inside his apartment. From the very beginning, he invited me over. Every single time we talked, he asked again. I always said no. At first, I blamed it on being cautious because of COVID. That excuse worked for a bit, but eventually he stopped accepting it. Then he started trying to invite himself into my place instead. I shut that down too, every time. One evening while I was outside smoking, he came over holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He said he'd just bought it and insisted I try it because it was really good. Right away, something felt off. The bottle had a screw cap, and the seal was already broken, but it looked completely full. Filled right up to the top, which struck me as strange. He poured 2 glasses and immediately told me to take a drink. The way he said it wasn't playful or casual. It was direct, almost impatient. I didn't want to accuse him of anything. I didn't want to escalate the situation, so I pretended to take a sip and told him it tasted fine. After nearly every sentence that followed, he told me again to drink. I tried to slow things down, saying I didn't drink much. I pointed out that he hadn't touched his glass and suggested he go ahead. He reached for it mid-conversation and knocked it over, spilling the wine into the grass. He brushed it off like it was nothing and told me it was my turn to drink. That's when I started pushing back. I told him I didn't want to drink alone and asked him to pour himself another glass. He did, but again, he didn't drink. A minute later, he told me to drink mine. I said he needed to catch up first. It went back and forth like that, over and over. Then he spilled his glass again. At that point, every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong. I told him directly that the situation felt sketchy, that I didn't trust the drink, and that his refusal to drink any of it while pressuring me made me uncomfortable. He laughed it off, said he was clumsy, said he didn't drink much. Then he added something that made my stomach drop. He said he knew I could handle it better than him because he'd seen me drinking with friends before. I never told him that. He doesn't live near my unit. He's about half a block away, with multiple other grassy areas closer to his apartment. From where he lives, he can't see my windows or my porch. The realization that he'd been watching me closely enough to know that detail changed everything. When I refused again, he poured himself another glass and spilled it yet again. There wasn't much wine left at that point. I poured the rest into his glass and told him we'd drink together on 3. He actually did take a sip that time. I dumped mine into the grass. 2 nights later, I ran into him again while smoking. He immediately started complaining about how I wouldn't date him or be intimate with him. His tone wasn't joking anymore. He got louder and louder, asking what was wrong with him, shouting that all women were the same. I told him calmly that I'd been honest from the beginning, that I wasn't interested. Not in him, not in anyone. He kept going. Then he started talking about his ex. And then, out of nowhere, he started talking about her dog. He said he used to abuse it. He went into detail about withholding food and water, about kicking it when it had accidents in the house. The entire time he was telling me this, he was throwing a toy for his current dog. That dog had always seemed afraid of him. I'd noticed it before and mentioned it once, and he'd told me the dog was traumatized from a previous owner. The dog, however, was always affectionate with me, always stayed close to me. Looking back, I don't think it was because I was special. I think it was because I felt safer. I made an excuse and left as soon as I could. After that, I stopped engaging with him completely. That's when the messages started. Strings of nonsense texts whenever he was outside. Repeated hi messages. Random letters. He texted me to tell me he knew I was home, that he'd seen my car, that he'd seen me walking around. He started leaving his dog's toys on my porch. He would stand outside my unit for long stretches of time, even in cold or rainy weather. I think he assumed I'd come out eventually because I smoke. I stopped using my back porch entirely. We only spoke for a few weeks in the summer of 2020. I haven't spoken to him since the night he yelled at me and admitted to abusing an animal. He still texts me. The most recent message was him asking what he'd done wrong and whether I felt disrespected. I haven't answered. I've thought about telling him exactly why I cut him off, but I don't want to give him insight into how to be better at hiding who he is. The biggest lesson I took from all of this is simple. Trust your instincts, and never drink something someone gives you if the seal is already broken. Last Sunday evening around 7:30, I was in the back bedroom of our apartment putting together a new dresser. The bedroom door was open, and I could see straight down the hallway into the living room where my fiancée was standing with our 2 kids while they played. The house was finally settling down after my 6-year-old's birthday party earlier that day. Out of nowhere, there was a knock at the front door. Before either of us could react, my son ran ahead and opened it. He knows he's not supposed to do that, and we've talked about it plenty of times, but he was still riding the excitement from his party and probably assumed another guest had come back. A woman was standing there. I recognized her immediately as someone who lives upstairs on the opposite side of the building. I'd seen her in passing but had never spoken to her before. She didn't wait to be invited in. She stepped straight past my son and into the apartment, saying she needed help. Almost instantly it was clear something was wrong. She was talking quickly, but nothing she said made sense. She kept contradicting herself, saying she was locked out of the building even though she was clearly inside it, then saying she could get into the building but not her apartment, then saying she could get into her apartment just fine. Over and over she kept repeating that she was exhausted, that she was so tired. Like that explained everything. Her balance was off. Her speech was sloppy and unfocused. She seemed distant, like she wasn't fully present. It didn't take long to realize she was having some kind of episode. As soon as I stepped closer to her, the situation felt wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. She talked in circles, repeating herself, mentioning that her parents would be worried if she didn't check in with them, even though I knew she lived alone. She kept asking us to call people for her. She was holding her phone in her hand, but it was open to the video recording screen. It wasn't actually recording, just open. At the same time, she kept rolling something around in her pocket with her hand. I could see the outline clearly. It looked like a screwdriver. When she started giving my fiancé numbers to dial, none of them were real phone numbers. They were always too short. When we told her there weren't enough digits, she'd start listing another number, then stop halfway through and trail off. This happened over and over, at least 7 or 8 times. She claimed her phone wasn't working, so I let her hold mine, hoping she'd call someone herself. Instead, she just stood there gripping it, not dialing anything, continuing to talk nonsense while clutching my phone like she wasn't going to let go. At that point, I was beyond uncomfortable. This woman had walked into my home uninvited and was behaving erratically around my children. I told my fiancé to take the kids into the back of the apartment and keep them there. I tried to gently steer the woman toward the door, telling her we could go check her apartment together and see if it was open. She said she was too tired to walk and suddenly sat down on our couch like she lived there. I was furious, but I forced myself to stay calm. My fiancé positioned himself behind her to block her from going deeper into the apartment or toward the kids again. I continued trying to convince her to leave, repeating myself for several minutes until she finally stood up and slowly shuffled out the door. I went ahead of her up the stairs, telling her to follow me to her apartment. On the way, she tried to open the doors to 2 other apartments that weren't hers. Each time, I had to stop her and tell her she had the wrong door. When I reached her apartment, the door was already wide open. She was still a few steps behind me, so I glanced inside. The living room was completely torn apart. Couch cushions were thrown everywhere, furniture shifted. The place looked ransacked. When she caught up, she once again tried to enter another neighbor's apartment across the hall. I corrected her and pointed her inside her own place. When she finally stepped in, she turned to me and apologized, saying she was sorry this was how we had to meet, and repeating again that she was just so exhausted. I didn't respond. I went straight back downstairs. The feeling in my gut wouldn't let it go. I called the police and explained that a neighbor I didn't know had entered my apartment acting disoriented and unstable. They said they'd send someone to check on her. About an hour later, officers knocked on her door. There was no answer. They left. At 4:15 in the morning, I woke up to use the bathroom. As I was standing there, I thought I heard a knock at the door. It was so light I wasn't sure it was real. I asked my fiancée if she heard it too. She hadn't. We both walked toward the living room. That's when we heard it. Scratching. Not knocking, scratching. Fingernails dragging against the door. It's a sound I'll never forget. I immediately told my fiancée to stay with the kids and make sure they were safe. I opened the door and saw the same woman standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at our door. I snapped. I told her there was no way this was happening again, screamed at her to get away from my apartment and stay away from my family, and told her I was calling the police right now. She immediately turned and disappeared up the stairs. I called the cops again. They showed up and asked her a series of mental health questions. Apparently, she answered them well enough that they decided there was nothing they could do. They told her to stay away from us and left. I haven't seen her since, but the feeling hasn't gone away. Another neighbor later told us that someone had been jiggling her doorknob in the middle of the night. I know exactly who it was. The apartment complex sent her a warning, but that doesn't make me feel better. Ever since she first walked into my home, I've had this constant pit in my stomach. I don't know what was going on with her, and I don't know if it's really over. All I know is that my first instinct now is anger and the need to protect my family, because whatever that was, it didn't feel random, and it didn't feel harmless. I used to live in a first-floor apartment in a small complex. There weren't many units around me, one directly next door and two others nearby. It wasn't a social place. People mostly kept to themselves, which I was fine with at the time. I met my next-door neighbor Joe one evening just as the sun was going down. He knocked on my door and introduced himself, explaining that he was going door to door asking if someone could watch his dog for the weekend. He said he'd just been called away for a last-minute work trip and didn't have anyone lined up. He was kind of stocky, with brown hair cut straight across his forehead, glasses, and a button-down shirt that made him look like an office guy. I agreed to help without much thought. I like dogs, and nothing about the request seemed strange. I asked for his phone number just in case something came up while he was gone, thinking only about potential issues with the dog. I didn't realize then how much I'd regret giving him my number. While we were talking, we got onto hobbies. I mentioned that I liked video games and that I played Dungeons and Dragons. He seemed really interested and said he liked those things too. I was just being friendly. I wasn't flirting, and I made sure my wedding ring was visible. My husband was deployed at the time, but that didn't feel like something I needed to explain. Joe came back Monday morning, and I gave him his key. I hadn't asked for payment, but he insisted on repaying me another way. He told me his office was doing an escape room event, and he was allowed to bring a guest. He suggested I go with him. It seemed harmless, and I figured it could be fun, so I agreed. When the day came, I wasn't feeling well at all. I stayed home from work and spent most of the day on the couch, wrapped in blankets with my dog Cortana. I texted Joe to let him know I was sick and wouldn't be able to make it, and told him not to worry about paying me back. He replied, okay. I didn't respond, and ended up falling asleep. Over the next few weeks, he started texting me more often. At first, it was just random messages, but then he asked why I hadn't invited him to play D&D. That confused me. I hadn't mentioned it recently, and the only explanation I could think of was that he'd overheard me talking about it in the hallway. Around that time, my dog started acting strangely. Right outside Joe's apartment was a small patch of grass where I usually took Cortana to go potty. She was normally calm and quiet, but suddenly she started barking aggressively at his window every time we went out there. The blinds were always completely closed. This happened every single day. Eventually, I started taking her somewhere else, and the behavior stopped. About a week later, I went back to that spot. The blinds were pulled all the way up, and the window was open. Joe leaned halfway out, stretching like he'd just woken up. I said a quick hello and hurried my dog back inside, feeling unsettled. After that, Joe started knocking on my door every couple of days. I'd go completely silent and check the peephole. Every time it was him, standing too close and staring straight into it. I never answered. Then I got a text from him asking me to go to dinner. I hadn't even finished processing it when another message came through a few minutes later, accusing me of ditching him and saying he was just trying to be friendly. At that point, I felt genuinely unsafe. I called my mom, and she told me to be firm and mention my husband. When I finally did, Joe backed off almost immediately. Even after that, my dog would still growl at his window whenever we passed. I eventually moved out and never heard from Joe again. But I still think about how quickly a simple favor turned into something that made me feel unsafe in my own home. This happened back in 2013. A kid named Johnny had moved in next door when he was around 12. Even back then, he was painfully soft-spoken and nervous all the time. I remember one afternoon when he was about 16, he wiped out on his skateboard in my driveway, barely hit the ground, and still ended up sitting there crying for a solid 10 minutes. That was just kind of who he was. Fast forward a couple of years. Johnny was around 18 by then, and somehow he'd become one of my regular customers. I wasn't exactly living a clean life at the time, and he was buying pretty often. By then he'd started hanging around people who were clearly bad news, the kind of guys my parents immediately clocked as trouble whenever they saw them nearby. My parents had no idea what I was involved in, and I worked hard to keep it that way. Johnny was a follower, through and through. He went from being a skater emo kid to trying way too hard to act tough, like he was playing a role he didn't really understand. It never quite fit. Every year my parents would go to the Outer Banks in North Carolina for 2 weeks and ask me to stay at the house while they were gone. I jumped at the chance. Their place was way nicer than the one-bedroom apartment I was living in at the time, and I liked having the space to myself. The first week went smoothly. My on and off girlfriend was over constantly, and the house saw more than its share of partying. I wasn't proud of it, but that was where my head was at back then. Earlier one day, I ran into Johnny out front of my parents' house. He asked me if I could front him something. I told him no. I didn't front anyone, and honestly, I was using more than I should have myself. He didn't take that well. We argued, and I embarrassed him in front of his friends. I didn't think much of it at the time. That night, my girlfriend had left a few hours earlier, and it was around 2 a.m. I was wide awake, sitting in a side den on the first floor with the lights off. Netflix paused, scrolling on my phone. One of the windows was cracked open. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a window screen being slowly lifted. I knew that sound well. I'd grown up sneaking in and out of that house. I stood up quietly and watched the curtain. I could see the screen moving, inch by inch. When I pulled the curtain aside, at least 3 or 4 people bolted. I ran outside, but they were already sprinting down the street. I didn't see faces, but I knew. It was Johnny and his friends. I didn't call the cops. I couldn't. I locked everything up and stayed alert for the rest of the night. Nothing else happened, and the rest of the week passed without incident. I never told my parents. I tried calling Johnny a few times afterward. No answer. I even sent him a message offering to front him, which was a lie. I just wanted to confirm it was him. He never responded. That silence told me everything. About a month later, I was watching the news when Johnny's face came on the screen. He and 3 others had broken into an elderly couple's home out of town. They beat them, tied them up, stabbed them, robbed the house, and set it on fire. Everyone involved turned on each other. Johnny got 35 years for testifying against the others. I still think about that night sometimes. If I hadn't been awake, if I hadn't heard that screen moving, I don't know how things would have ended.